And we're live.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to another exciting episode of Inside Movies Galore. I am your host, David Streggy, and I am proud to present to you my second choice for my month here. And hopefully, you guys didn't mind the change because these are all movies that I have found that I enjoy. And since we are heading into our fifth year of being together on the air, we are sharing movies that mean something to us that we wouldn't mind sharing with the rest of the group. So, this particular film, I was actually introduced to the book first. I was awarded a man to me to be a mentor by the state when I was growing up, and he gave me a book, and it just so happened to be Flowers for Algernon. And originally it was a short story written in 1958, and which eventually the author ended up expanding the novel, expanding it into novel form. And then the first thing that we get film wise was this particular movie, Charly, which was filmed in 1968. And it was produced and directed by Ralph Nelson, written by Sterling Siliphant. And it's basically essentially a science fiction drama romance. The novel was originally written by Daniel Keyes, and the film stars Cliff Robertson as the one and only Charlie Gordon, and Claire Bloom, Lilia Scala, Leon Janey, Dick Van Patten, and Barney Martin as well star in this movie. But let's see what IMDb says about the film. As far as I know, IMDb says here in the description, an intellectually disabled man undergoes an experiment that gives him the intelligence of a genius. So let's go into first impressions. My apologies about my voice. I am still getting over being sick, ladies and gentlemen. So let's go. Let's go with you, Brandon. Was this a first time watch for you?
Unmute myself. Yes, this is a first time watch, and I will say it is a bit of whiplash after Bunny the Killer Thing. Slightly different film, and it was entertaining enough. There are parts of it that I felt kind of were a little bit jarring pacing wise, but otherwise I really liked it. I thought it was very interesting. It asks a lot of questions that I think could apply even today in society about coulds, shoulds, or even the true testing of the scientific method.
Okay. Going forward here, let's ask Crow. Was this a first time watch for you? You are on mute. Kroll.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, this was the first time watching it.
Okay. And what were your thoughts? First thoughts on the film?
It was definitely not my cup of tea. Not really into just straight drama like that. I know it did have romance in it, but it was an okay movie. I mean, it has moments. Has a few funny scenes, and they do make you care for the character for the character well, and which brings you to the ending, which I was not a big fan of at all. But so that's basically it.
Okay. Heading over to you, Dustin. Was this a first time watch for you?
I'd never heard of this movie before, but this was actually a very good drama. I was honestly quite impressed. So I didn't much care for, the downer conclusion, but we're getting ahead of ourselves here. Overall, I enjoyed the movie, except for that. And it was quite good. So never heard of the book either. Although, well, Flowers for Algernon I had heard of, but I assumed that it was based off of a different book. But I assume not. After hearing all that, so this was based off of Flowers for Algernon,
yes,
yeah, it's a straight up adaptation.
Flowers for Algernon was originally a short story. In fact, I'll go into it a little bit more after we get through the first impressions, because there's an interesting thing.
It is just interesting, you know. You don't usually see that where it's like it goes through every stage of being a thing, you know.
Well, also the author the author was very insistent on the ending not changing during publication, which I'll go into more after we get through first impressions. Mo, why don't you tell us?
I don't think Dustin was done. Actually, I think he was just commenting on.
I was just saying. I wasn't sure if Charly was a book or like a revamp of Flowers, but that answered my question. So I mean, this was really well done. It was really well acted. It was good.
Okay.
All right. So, dude, I honestly was not expecting. I don't know what I was expecting with this. I heard these guys saying it was good, and I was like, "Oh, it did look like a fun like '70s movie," but I didn't put two and two together that it was a movie I'd seen until I sat down to watch it. You know, and it's saying based on Flowers by Algernon, and then once it gets into it and you see the dude actually playing Charly or whatever, it's like, oh, fuck, I totally saw this at some point. I'm pretty sure they made us watch it in school after we read the book, because the book was one of those required reading books when I was in school. And I love it, man. I mean, it's great, you know. Obviously, as you pointed out, there's some differences with the novel and some stuff that they kind of excise out for the sake of like time, probably. But I don't know, in terms of like novel adaptations, I mean, I guess it gave me the same feeling basically that I remember getting from reading the book. So
yeah, if they had gone play by play for what the novel brought out, it would have been at least a 3-hour movie. So they had to cut out some things,
right,
to save for sharing the bare essentials for
right. Yeah, and I mean and that's fair enough. That's pretty much what's going to happen with any, you know, feature film adaptation of a novel. It's well acted, like Dustin said. You know, I think the score is pretty decent. I think it's got enough of those weird things in it that can only exist in like a late 60s, early 70s movie. Like when he's climbing on the jungle gym with the kids at the beginning. That's just one of my favorite. It's so weird.
There are weirder things.
There are, but I mean, it's just the movie opens right up with something kind of weird and almost sinister.
Well,
you know, you guys that saw Bunny probably were watching the beginning of this maybe without the context, thinking like, what did Dave do? You know, what is this movie that we're about to?
Right.
but it's super
After-
pleasant, dude. And I mean, yeah, it has some bummer stuff in it, but it's one of those movies like if you saw it home from school with the flu, or like, you know, found it in your grandparents' VHS tapes and just watched it, you'd probably dig it, and it'd become one of those movies that you would have watched just because it's a solid film, I guess. I don't know. It's cool it's your favorite, but I don't know if it would be that for me. It would definitely have been something, though, had I not seen it, I'm pretty sure in school, I maybe would have caught it somewhere else, I would hope, and would have been able to see it, because it was cool, like remembering, like, holy shit, I've seen this movie, you know.
I was gonna say, Mo, don't worry. After the Bunny the Killer thing incident, I made sure before agreeing to do this one that I read the synopsis.
I love Bunny, but I mean, I think for probably different reasons than, yeah, it's a repugnant little piece of shit. It's got its charm, I guess, depending on your tastes, but this is just a charming film, you know. Yes. It really is. It's got that it's not a 70s movie, but it basically is, you know. 68 to 72 was kind of the same era.
Early 70s.
You can tell it's from the 60s because it has some really bizarre camera tricks, and
it's bordering on the 70s though. Much of these porridge fed looking motherfuckers in there with their plaid.
I mean, in reality, 65 to 75 is a lot more congruent than, say, it's usually that middle. It's usually that middle of the decade to the middle of the next decade that kind of shares more in common than the actual decade itself.
It's like there's always, even in the late 90s, you saw that the late 90s were way more 2000s than the 2000s ended up being. Like it was kind of disappointing, you know. You thought there was going to be all this shit and like there's going to be cyberpunks everywhere or some shit, but that's not how it turned out.
There's still hope.
Well, it has a bunch of like trippy sequences in it.
It definitely does.
Yeah, visually it's a fun movie just for that stuff, where it's like, what the hell's going on, and why do I like the way it's shot so much, you know?
Heading over to Tammy, was this the first time watch for you?
I think so. At times it seemed like it was familiar, but I thought it was a really good movie, very moving. You know, made you think a lot. But I thought it was good.
Okay. And actually, yes, you and I had actually watched it before, some years back. It was back when I was actually looking to see what kind of film adaptations were for the book. And the DVD for this was like really out of print at the time. And there was no Blu-ray release for it at that time that I was looking for it. And I relatively paid
thank you to
$60. I relatively paid $60 for my copy of the DVD.
Dang.
Thanks to Kino, it's back in print again, which is great.
Woohoo!
Those are alligator prices. At one point, I owned 4 alligator DVDs, and they were that expensive too.
Yeah, for that much money, that mouse better fucking kill the dude. You know,
go all bunny on him.
Yeah, but I really liked the book, so I really thought that I was probably getting my money's worth, and I'm really glad that I did. So,
oh yeah, I feel that, dude. I could see doing that for certain adaptations of books like this that I remember seeing as a kid. It's got that special place in your heart. The book certainly, I mean, I guess the book and the movie have that for me, right? It's definitely a nostalgic thing because it's something I remember from school, and I've been going through all those lately. It's just, it for some reason didn't occur to me that outside of Hatchet and like the survival books, I could also be reading depressing shit like this, you know. So I'm gonna get my copy
Actually,
of
that makes me think of the movie Dark Age. Was based off a book called Numenwari, and so I did something similar but opposite. Where after seeing the movie, I had to track down the book, and the book was actually fairly difficult to find. I had to order it all the way from Australia to get like, an original hardcover. Got really lucky on price.
going over to Jake. Was this a first-time watch for you?
Yes, this was definitely a first-time watch. This was one that kind of was on my radar, but in different ways. I've known the title "Flowers for Algernon" for years, but I had never read it, and I never made the connection to this movie. It's kind of been like I should read that one of these days, sort of thing.
That is actually my recommendation for you, Jake. Maybe it'll be another novel you can find in your library.
Maybe one day, yes.
Paired up with those Mice and Men.
And now this one was going to be in my library for another reason. I made a lot of jokes, a lot of Spider-Man jokes about this one, but I'm sorry. To me, Cliff Robertson, I will always associate him with Uncle Ben because that's kind of the first role I remember him in. And I always thought he's not that good at Uncle Ben. I know a lot of people disagree.
It is Uncle Ben.
A lot of people would disagree with me on that, but I
was gonna say that's crazy talk.
I didn't realize that was
I had heard somewhere along the line that he was an Oscar winner, and I was like, really? This guy was really? But then this was his one and only nomination, and he won for this role.
I would have loved the crushed look on your face if he had won for Uncle Ben, but that makes sense.
But again, my screen capture here, I had to put it up in the notes because I'm sorry, at that moment, he was, I thought, the spitting image of Tobey Maguire, and I'm convinced this movie is why Sam Raimi cast him in the role, because I think they do kind of look alike if you look at him the right way, but especially when he was playing Charlie with the developmental issues, he had that kind of doofy look that Maguire always has, and not to throw shade on Maguire there. I'm just
direct Tobey Maguire.
He always has that kind of doofy
look. If he turned into like a man rat or whatever, a man mouse, because like he gets bit by her, he gets like some big old incisors. So that'd have been pretty sweet.
So basically, so this was one that I would have probably gotten to eventually, but I'm kind of glad that Dave brought it up and kind of put it, forward for, and it is in many ways, a nice palate cleanser after last week. There were some issues that I thought maybe showed the film's age. It definitely shows its age. And a big part of that is in the portrayal of Charlie in those early scenes. I felt a little uncomfortable when the film started, but then once the plot really got underway and I understood really where they were going with it, I was like, okay, okay, let's look at this. And in the end, I actually did really like the movie. I thought it was a good movie. Like I said, certain parts I thought didn't age well. There were pacing issues. Whoever said that, I agree fully. There were pacing issues. Yep. But overall, it was a good one, and I'm glad I got to see it.
Another thing.
And the score by Ravi Shankar is awesome. I'm just going to go ahead and say that right away.
I think we're the only two that mentioned the music, which it made an impression on me. It's like, damn, it's not too shabby. Another thing that really dates it is what's her name, Claire Bloom, her fucking the choice of hairstyle with her hairline.
That was very 60s look.
Yeah, I get it. I got a fucked up hairline too. That's why I don't wear my hair in ways that makes my forehead look gigantic. But she's still a beautiful woman, so don't matter. That five head can come home all day.
So at this moment, I wanted to say something about the publication history of the short story, the novel. Flowers for Algernon was originally first published as the lead story in an April 1959 issue of the magazine of fantasy and science fiction. It was later reprinted in the Best from Fantasy and Science Fiction ninth series in 1960. And the expanded novel was first published in 1966, originally by Harcourt Brace, and then later with Bantam paperback. One thing of note is that originally the author had tried to go with Doubleday, but they wanted to change his ending. And originally, the short story had an editor for a certain magazine that he also wanted to change the ending. He wanted him to change it to him marrying the teacher and living a happy life. Basically, that white picket fence and whatnot, because they didn't like that sad ending. You know, they thought that it was, stupid at the time. But
they were just scared.
The author
they were scared
held
little
back.
bitches about it. They didn't want to get any backlash from people like Kroll.
The author held back and stood his ground until he got the proper publication that was needed for that ending. And this movie did get the ending that happened in the novel, technically, except for the fact of the flowers for Algernon. But that is understandable because it's not called Flowers for Algernon. It's called Charly. So
it should have been called Flowers for Algernon, so it would be less easy for someone like me to forget that it exists.
There was a 90s movie that was made for TV called Flowers for Algernon, which has Matthew Modine in the picture. And it's not as great as this one, I don't think. I've seen it, I own it, and I just own it because it's another adaptation.
I looked at like the cover image for it or whatever, and it did look vaguely familiar. So it's possible I maybe caught that too at some point, but this is the only one I really remember. And even this, I didn't really remember it. I get why they did it, I suppose. Charly is probably, I guess, marketable in some way. Yeah, I guess it's probably kind of problematic too that they did it with that inverted R, like, you know what I mean, where it's like that's pretty fucked up. But it's I feel like if it was called Flowers for Algernon and it was just the 1968 version, there'd be more people that would have seen it again as adults, because it might have came across my radar even accidentally when I was looking up like the My Side of the Mountain movie and stuff.
Yeah,
it's sort of like Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory versus Charly and the Chocolate Factory. Different character, except there's no candy company representing Charly. That's in this one.
So let's look at some of the main characters of the film. Let's look at Charly Gordon as a character first. What do you all think about Charly Gordon as a character in the film?
I actually liked. I know that part of the portrayal could be considered problematic, but I did actually like some of the portrayal of him being, an individual with an intellectual disability, having his own apartment. Yes, it was kind of a rented room or rooms over. Having a job that he's working at, and yes, a lot of people around him are assholes, but living his life as he wants to live it. So in a way, I kind of look at that and I think to myself, I mean, it may be rough, but at least it sounds like he was living the life that he could and doing quite well, doing better than a lot of people.
I mean, dude, anything. I'll go for it.
I was going to say something to the fact that in the short story, he's actually working for a plastics factory. In the novel, he is working for a bakery, and this.
Oh, it does. I thought it was a potato shooting out. I was pretty ripped when I watched this, to be honest. So at first I was like, "Did they work at a milk factory?" And then
Nope, it was in fact
they were
a
like
bakery.
shooting potatoes out. So I
It
was
was a
like, "Oh,
bakery.
maybe it's potatoes." I guess I just tuned out during any of the bakery parts, maybe.
But go ahead. You were saying something, Mo?
Oh, it's just I think they do a surprisingly, whatever you want to call it, progressive job of the way he was portrayed for it being 1968 and what average people probably knew about this stuff back then, up to and including the people involved in the movie and the novel. It's more of a speculative moral conundrum, I guess, and so it makes sense that it would start as like a short story in some magazine for people that like to read, and then eventually be expanded into a novel and a movie. I don't think anything that they do in it is necessarily intentionally.
I mean, I look at
that
it
way,
I look at it and I think to myself, when you're going back and looking at portrayals of people with intellectual disabilities, this is actually quite a progressive portrayal.
Yeah.
I mean, other people who are portrayed with the same type of situations are much less independent, much less capable, or even portrayed as monsters in many cases.
There's movies that have done it far, far, far worse, and not for nothing, but this one, it has its moments that are wince-worthy, but it's definitely not, something I would think people would have too huge of an issue with to see today.
This was the first one besides the movie Sybil that I remembered around this time period that they portrayed, a disability in such array, So seeing that progression and experimental psychiatry, that goes behind some of the treatment that is involved in Charly's well-being is definitely different. It's more like we're looking at his life inside of a test tube to me.
Well, I think if I'm not mistaken, the earlier 60s was a time when they were still really just starting to even try to figure that stuff out, So
psychiatry didn't even have ethical regulations until the 90s. So it was not uncommon to do experiments. I mean, in the 60s and 70s, you had some of the most horrific things done in the name of psychiatry.
Yeah, dude. I mean, MK Ultra and things like that. There's some crazy shit that was going on back then. So Flowers for Algernon's not even that weird in the grand scheme of things.
Though the experiment that they did in this would never have happened the way it is today in the United States. It would have had to happen in a different country where the regulations aren't quite there. It would have had to been tested at least long enough on the mice. They would have realized what was going on before they could even get to the human stages.
Yeah, that's just not how that actually works in real life. I don't even think...
Oh, they could have gotten away with it in the 60s, definitely, and in the 70s. Trust me, the stuff I've seen and read about, they had an experiment where they made people think that they killed somebody by shocking them to death, just to see how they would do. That's just one of many terrible things they did, and
that's rough.
Some type of fucking weird World War II universe,
I think Charly as a character was pretty decent, and the actor's portrayal did a really well job. Mine's more closer to like Dustin Hoffman.
Now you had said it didn't hold up, Jacob. You said that it was kind of like definitely didn't hold up to today's standard. What was the unrealistic on it?
I wouldn't necessarily say that. The performance itself mostly was really good. There was one very sour note, but I think that goes down as partly to do with the pacing of the film and the portrayal of Miss Kenyon, and we'll get to that when we get to that. But it's more the issue of people back then, and I feel like there is some good to this, and there's also some bad to this. It's like it's a a couple steps forward and a step back, I guess you could say. Is that nowadays people get really, 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 really defensive and up in arms if actors try to cross certain lines and to portray a group that's not really one that they're, you know what I mean? Like, this came out at a time where, you want to play someone with a developmental disorder, have at it, go for it, you know. And nowadays people will look at you funny, you know what I mean? Like that's
a difference in like
I think
one could say the same about the
I know,
Elephant Man or
right,
or My Left Foot. It's like,
right.
There's only
Well,
so many actors that you're going to find that.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Like, that's one of the things that when I first started the film, I was like, oh, this wouldn't have got made today. But then when it got further into the plot and you realize this is a movie where you need someone who has the ability to go all the way through, I didn't feel that as much after seeing the movie, but I had that feeling strong early on, if that makes sense.
I feel like a lot of that stuff too, it really boils down to like maybe let someone with those actual disabilities watch the movie and say how they feel about it. I mean, maybe they'll be like, they get a lot of it wrong, but they get a lot of it right, too, so I can relate to it. I mean, I don't know that I feel comfortable fucking speaking for somebody just because they're a little bit developmentally disabled. You know, they probably still have opinions. I don't think any one of them would probably be like offended by Flowers for Algernon. I think there's parts of it that they would probably really like, you know. I
mean, I think one could say the very concept of the experiment would be considered ableist or nasty by today. The concept of saying that
we can fix you, you know, which is just ridiculous to think
and
about.
That,
I mean,
the concept of it, of the experiment, was more offensive, I think, than anything that was actually portrayed for the most part.
I think it is. I think what's offensive is them being irresponsible and doing it before they knew what was the outcome of it, you know. So they gave Charlie a brief taste of what could have been the benefits of it. But then he, you know, I mean, it's like that's what's to me is.
And then that one dude, and then that one dude trying to get away with it, which I guess we'll when we get into the more of the plot, you know.
They definitely didn't make them the good guys by any means.
But again, and just one last thing, again, I wasn't meaning that as a strong critique. I was just saying like that was kind of my early impression. The thought kept running through my head of in terms of the way that Robertson portrayed the role. I kept thinking about Tropic Thunder and Simple Jack. It's like this is a much more compassionate and accurate depiction.
Well, let's get into the plot a little bit more, just to try to speed some of this along. So we have the character of Charlie Gordon, who is a 32-year-old man who has a job in a bakery as someone who cleans up the place. And he goes to night school to try to learn English better and to be able to read better. And he does this all on his own volition, you know, on his own, you know, independent, so to speak. And this is seen by his teacher, Miss Kenyon, which is part of the reason why she's so for him getting this experimental surgery done, at least in the beginning, you know. And ultimately, he is chosen for this experiment and goes through with it. And then he starts to get smarter. And he also has a very interesting relationship with a mouse by the name of Algernon. What do we think about the fact that, you know, a mouse is used in relation to helping him get better?
Oh, Algernon's my favorite character. Such a great actor, and just to see him running that maze is great. And I do love, by the way, the whole depiction of him, like it's saying even like his frustration. I'm not gonna race, but I'm not gonna race you again. I do love. I like Algernon. I think great mouse actor.
Dustin, we haven't heard from you in a little bit. What do you think about the progression of the character of Charly Gordon?
Sounds about right.
Who, me?
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Oh, I missed who you were talking to. No, so at first, they were like, "Oh no, it didn't work," and I was like, "I bet it takes longer with a human." And at first, I was kind of annoyed with the doctors because it's like, did you not consider that it would take longer, like, to kick in for a human than a mouse? Like, did you expect the same like curve? Like, seriously? Like, so that kind of suspended my disbelief broke my suspension of disbelief briefly.
I mean, again, though, in 68, well, I feel like by 68, they would have known the brains were more complicated than that.
Yeah.
But maybe, but not by the time the novel was written.
Yeah, so that actually annoyed me. But, you know, his character growth happened pretty quickly. There was, I don't think we've gotten to it yet. There was a moment where he did something that really surprised me. But I was like, oh no, is he evil now? And then it just kind of worked out like fine, and it was like, okay.
That part, I think I know what you're talking about. Yeah, it's probably one of the few parts I had more of a problem with.
The part where he goes all stalkery on his teacher.
Yeah,
he just like jumps on her.
I know why they were going. Well, I know where they were going with it, but to say to do that implies that he didn't have the capability of doing those, of expressing those feelings or feeling those feelings.
Well,
really
they straight up said that he had a child's development mentally, so I think that if that's what they were trying to show, they did a fair job of it.
Yeah, you're not thinking about that when you're a little lad, you know.
But this was what I mentioned earlier when I said I did have an issue at one point. One, because yes, he does come off as a bit of a villain there, even if you know what you think they're going for. But the other thing is the way they wrote it for Miss Kinnian, where basically a scene later she's entirely cool with the whole thing.
That's a pacing issue.
That was a major pacing issue, but I also think that was a characterization lapse on her part.
I actually think differently on that. Yeah. I think she had the feelings too, but when he kissed her, she was conflicted because she had a fiance. He was supposed to be just her student. Like, she had all these emotions and thoughts in her head going through her head. So she just wanted to get away from the situation. I don't think she necessarily was pushing him away. To push him away is just more pushing her feelings away. She didn't know what to think or what to feel at that point.
I think they could have done a little bit better job of pacing it out a little bit, showing that she's not really showing more she's not satisfied in the current relationship.
Well, he
Showing,
kept pointing it out. He kept
well, yeah,
pointing it out to her, like, oh, you don't do this, you guys don't do that, he only kissed you on the cheek, just he kept pointing things out.
but only after the operation. I think they should have shown more his attraction to her prior to the operation, because again, I feel like they were like, oh well, he's incapable of such complex feelings of love because of his disability, is how they portrayed it, in my opinion, or
I
that
honestly I honestly think that we get some of that progressive relationship of Charly having feelings for her while she's going on a date with her fiance and she's saying goodnight to her. He's looking at her with her fiance, maybe not with the intelligence that he does after the surgery, but like with some kind of conscience that he likes her, and he doesn't know how to express his feelings.
And again, I just feel like it could have been paced better. That was probably the issue.
Yeah.
I think that, and sometimes you just got to rush through with films, which is the one weakness. I think if they had a little bit more time,
unfortunately, they cut a character love interest from the novel in this story, because later on in the novel, there is another love interest after he gets bored with Miss Kenyon, who just so happens to be a neighbor of his.
All right.
A neighbor of his by the name of Faye.
See, but I think that would have just bogged the movie down, and also made Charly less of a likable character. You can't just have him being like, I'm bored of this woman, I'm moving on to the sweet hot neighbor lady. I think that they excised it for time, and also just because it doesn't really, adds something to the book, obviously, because you get more time to sink into characters in a book.
They wanted the teacher
in a movie,
it
would have just been weird,
They wanted the teacher to be the love interest, even from the editor standpoint. So,
well, true love is what they want to present. Even though true love is really difficult in real life, it's one thing that we want to keep portraying in movies as there's just the one. You find the one and you're good. And where love a lot of times is a lot of trial and
hard
error.
work and trial and error. That's not something you always just land like that. But I don't know, man. I think that's one of those things they probably excised that I wouldn't say would change the end product too much.
In the novel, his love interest was a settlement, basically. It was ultimately Miss Kenyon that they tried to, the author had him settle for having Miss Kenyon as a relationship again towards the end. But there also, he chose not to, because of his intelligence that was fleeting from him in the end anyways. So
what about his friends? I know we covered some of them, but friends being in quotations,
they weren't his friends.
Oh, my friends.
Yes.
Yeah, they weren't his friends.
Who made that? There was somebody that made that point. Oh, it was last podcast on the left where they were talking about Pee Wee Gordon, which is slightly less a desirable character. But the idea of him saying all my friends, but no one's really his friend. Everybody is kind of just there looking at him and behind his back making fun of him. The only difference between Barfly and this, in that sense, is that Barfly, he knew that they didn't like him, but he just didn't care. And Charly didn't realize that they didn't really like him, but they were just they weren't all that intelligent themselves, and like many bullies, they were lower on the totem pole probably themselves, and they had somebody that they could pick on to make them feel better, even though they themselves really weren't all that
And they
great.
were really mean to him.
Assholes.
I mean, they were really mean to him. And
Yeah.
the sad thing is he didn't even know that it was mean. You know, he just thought it was a joke. You know,
And
He-
that reflects real life so badly. It's sadly truth.
Yeah, it's actually painful
Yeah.
how much that reflects real life with that
Actually,
kind of stuff, because
it hit kind of home for me. Even with the kitchen setting, I'm not going to go into specifics, but one of the jobs I had, there was a kid who was on the autism spectrum who, was being bullied by the cooks, and he ended up glomping onto me because I was one of the only people who was nice to him, and I saw these scenes and I'm like, yeah, that shit happens, and it's not.
And it reflects.
So those
comes
guys
again,
were
yeah.
assholes.
I mean, it comes back again when he's looking at that and he sees that one person who's at the waiting staff when he's at the bar, and how he's being treated, and he sees himself in that, and how terrible that is.
Correct. And him being more intelligent at the time, that's another growing thought process, because realizing that person was him at one point in time, you know.
That was a nice moment when he went over and helped him, though.
And in life, though, we all have that sort of reflection, not quite to that level, but you think about it. Like if you've worked in the food service industry and you're not in it anymore, you come back and you see other people being mistreated by others in the industry, and you can reflect back to your time on it and going, that's wrong. When you might not have realized that before when you didn't work it or you didn't experience it. That's why I think everybody should be forced to work in the food service industry at least for 6 months so that they can understand.
Yeah, I think a lot of people would
the best
complain
of humanity.
significantly less about minor shit if they had ever done it for 2 minutes. But I don't know. I think I have a flagrant disregard for customer satisfaction, but I have a great pride in doing like my job well. So I don't need to be worried about customer satisfaction because the job is done well. But I could give a fuck about the customers, in my mail route or at the gas station. And that's from years of working in service industry. Fuck you, actually. I'm just going to do my job good. And then, you can reap the benefits of that, you dick. Because most people don't give a shit about you, man. I've already seen it again at the gas stations, but I'm like a grown man now, so I don't deal with it in the same way as I would have back then. It's like, no, you can just actually walk inside the store and pay them if you want gas. Sorry.
What do we think about the doctors that are portrayed in
Assholes.
This movie?
They are assholes, essentially. They're just as bad in a way as the bullies.
Yeah.
Because they
I
hold
don't
themselves
think the
above
woman
everyone.
is as bad.
No, well, I don't count her in that group, but yeah, it's excising her. They're just doctors. They don't see him as a person. They see him as an experiment, which a lot of people back then, unfortunately, did.
Well,
yeah,
I gotta say, I didn't even recognize Dick Van Patten. And when I saw that, I was like, really? That was him?
It actually says Richard Van Patten in the credits, but yeah. As soon as I saw the character, I was like, oh, it's Dick Van Patten.
But like, he was just kind of there helping out. But your main ones, you got Dr. Nammer and Dr. Strauss. And Strauss, I'll give her this. She believed when they realized what was going on with the experiment, she wanted to be upfront about it. He wanted to hide it, sweep it under the rug, and go, let's just talk about the good stuff. And so that's like, I think there was a big difference in terms of their professional ethic, but in terms of their way of seeing Charlie as something other than experiment. I think I can agree. They all kind of saw him more that way.
Well, and that's the stupid thing about it is the way science actually works and doctoring and stuff. Yeah. Like if that were to happen, like say now, they just wouldn't lie about the bad parts of it. You know, they'd be like, yeah, this should all happen, but we did learn this.
Well, so I don't know. It depends. It depends on where they're reporting and who they're reporting to. There's still a lot of bias.
You know what I mean? The basic logic would right. Is that they would just be like, yeah, there was some, stuff that happened. I'm sure shit gets covered up in science all the time, but
it depends on the country. It really does.
Well, that
you've got to be debriefed legally. They would have had to debrief him on all of their findings. No, he didn't have to.
Nowadays, there's a lot more things in place that would prevent them from just sweeping something like that shit under the rug,
Right.
Probably because of real life circumstances of shit similar to this happening, as me and Brandon alluded to earlier. But yeah, it's definitely a harder thing to.
There's a lot more woke people now than there are.
Woke has nothing to do with it. Then. I mean, when it comes down to basic ethics with medicine and science,
Well, that's the good side of being. Actually, I could say being woke. If you want to go with it that way, then being woke is a good thing. Because I'm sorry, basic human rights is there. A good example of something they did back then that reflects this very well. They had a college campus therapy thing where they had like a little machine, and they would get these like really ultra masculine like fraternity people, and they bring them in and they say, oh, well, these are the waves of people who are gay, and these are the waves of people who are straight. And they would present all of the hyper masculine ones. They'd present most of them with the regular, but then they give a couple of like, oh, look, you've got the gay ones. And then they don't debrief and they just leave. And then they kind of watch it from the side. Now, you talk. That's about what they did with them. That's you talk about messing people's heads up at the time. And again, different times, but no, that wouldn't be acceptable anytime today.
I think.
Basic ethics and politics don't, work into the same thing with me. I hate terms like woke when it comes to shit like this because it's just like you just wouldn't do that to someone,
I agree.
Republican, Democrat, whatever. It's just not the thing you fucking would do. So who cares
somewhat
what the bogeyman word is? It's just
a somewhat more recent example of quote unquote medical research being blithely manipulated in real life is one that's alluded to in that recent series Dope Sick, where they had the basically all of the stuff about the painkiller becoming the default, the whole pain scale and all that's the opioid epidemic and all that. A lot of it had its roots in what it turned out. It was an opinion piece written, an editorial submitted to a scientific journal. This dude had no idea that people were citing him again and again and again. And this editorial was cited as proof of this grand experiment that this stuff really worked. And a big part of the opioid epidemic came out of that complete fabricated bullshit misrepresentation of, so that kind of stuff does still happen. That was in the 80s,
but it's not legal necessarily either.
No, it's not, but it happens.
There is fallout for it, for what they did.
And that brings you to like the central sort of thought exercise of the movie is it's a basic ethical exercise with, medicine and ethics as far as like that stuff goes, or integrity with your science. You should, if you're a real scientist, you should be accurately recording the failures as well as the success. the only way that actual science happens.
The way the book is
For
is
science.
Yeah,
The-
like as a scientist, I thought a lot of what
Go
they
ahead,
were
Dave.
doing was unethical in this movie.
the way
And it seemed like they fudged their results too.
the way
Yes,
the
they
book was written was partially through progress reports as his progress went, from
I do
beginning
feel
to
like I
end.
remember it feeling more like journal entries, similar
Yeah, it
almost to
was-
like a Diary of Anne Frank feeling when you're
Yeah.
reading through the actual book.
Yeah. So that was a difference when it came to the novelization. Now in the novel, because of his intelligence expands, he does feel like the doctors are not thinking of him as a human and thinking of him as more of a laboratory experiment. So he does take Algernon and run at that moment where they were going to like talk to an audience about their findings and stuff. Well, he skips out on them and then finds an apartment, and that's where he like meets that neighbor lady and kind of has something with her, and then eventually he goes back to being with Miss Kenyon, and ultimately somewhere in all that, Algernon dies, and before he knows that he's lost it, he eventually takes and submits himself to the school and lives his life out at the school. But in here, we know they leave what happens to him up for grabs. What exactly happens to him, and you see a progression of him realizing that he doesn't have much more time being as smart as he is. So eventually he goes off, and after thinking about it, comes back, and he basically says, "Hey, what can I do to help?" So, and this is what's happening in the film.
And of course, they do that much more quickly in the film, which they just go straight to it when he finds out. I really like the scene when they're presenting it, and he basically goes on. He calls them out, and to me,
Indeed,
it was one of the stronger. Actually, no, I would say it is the strongest scene in this film, where he just
Agreed.
gets up and he flays them. He lays them out.
Yeah, he
And,
pones their ass, as the kids would say.
Well, yeah, because he said he's got a question for the audience. Who is Charlie Gordon?
And the audience reflects the doctors. The audience does not see him as human until he asks that exact question. Who is Charlie Gordon? And once he gets to that, he's not just calling the doctors out that are working with it. He's calling out everybody. And that is the beauty of that scene.
Well, and
Now,
he calls out
okay.
the doctors and tells them, "Hey, why didn't you tell me that I didn't have enough time?" Go ahead.
All right.
You were saying something, Mo.
So I wanted to bring in something. It's a little something we do over at the Amityville Horror Podcast, and that's something called "You Can Only Do That in the Movies." It's Clint's segment, so shout out to Clint if you end up listening to this. But basically, what we're going to do now is discuss whether or not this even actually makes sense, or it's only something you could do in the movies. Because I don't believe if you just perform some brain surgery on someone that would, for the sake of argument, make them intelligent overnight or start making them exponentially more intelligent. I don't think that they would immediately be dealing with that and being smart or something. I think that they would be in a world of terror for quite the first few weeks, and then you would gradually have to coax them out of it, because it's like, you're intelligent enough to understand the pain of being alive or something. I mean, I don't know, the mentality we're working on in this movie, I don't think that he would be able to go into doing that.
Well, there are two issues. Oh, go ahead. Well, go ahead, Dave.
I was going to say one of the things that I wish they had kept in this movie is the fact that Charly, when he has the surgery, he then, in the novel, he begins to remember his abusive relationship with his mother, his estranged relationship with his sister, and his father, Matt.
Yeah, it sends them all haywire. I mean, that might happen. That could be a thing that could happen, but it's just him being smart, I feel like, is something you could only do in the movies, because I feel like, you're not just going to advance to being like actually smart. You're for the sake of argument, again, if some surgery could just make you go from being like non-intelligent to intelligent, I think it would it'd be a far more excruciating process and probably wouldn't even end well, maybe.
I think
even worse than this.
I do think that the pacing of the film doesn't do this any favors, but I think I understand how they did it. Is that this was portrayed as a very long process and gradual process of him getting slowly smarter. And as that happens, and they have the doctors around him and everybody supporting him, he has less. By the time he starts catching up and becoming smarter and smarter, he's able to adapt because of that slowness. But again, I don't think they depict it as well in the movie as it could be. But I think that's really how it is. And as far as that parading thing, it depends on the time. In the time this film was created, they would definitely have paraded their dancing monkey in front of the crowd, as they would probably even refer to him behind bars.
Right.
And could he have done that exact? And I would be willing to bet money that the questions that they had those crowd members ask, those insensitive, terrible questions, would be exactly what they would have asked if this had happened in real life and that time period. It's
maybe, but I mean, at the end of the day, we're asking you for, do you think that you could just do a surgery on someone and make them smart? And do you think it would have similar results? Maybe.
I don't think in this day and age we have the intelligence it's beyond our technologies. Yes, we know a lot about the brain. There is so much that we do know about the brain, but do we know enough about the brain?
Yeah, but we can't.
Do we know enough about the brain to reroute it and make a perfect brain? Because in all reality, I mean,
right.
We see a lot of surgeries in like television shows that deal with medicine, and they're all the time like showing us that they can do this on TV, but can they do it in reality, in real life? Mm-hmm. Can they reconnect the right tendons with the right circuits?
There's an old movie, and I can't remember. I think it's Frankenstein that it said, we take so much time asking the question if we could, but did we ask it, if we should? And I think this applies very well to this.
It's been used a few times, of course.
But I think it should be done in a way that I think there's a lot more technology we need to develop to make something like this safely possible to try.
Right. Well, this is a sci-fi.
I mean, you can't just be doing this on random people and mice. And
again, it goes back to that idea of, if you say that something needs to be fixed, you're saying something is broken. Now, But
I mean, that's a slippery slope to get into, because it's like,
I also think that it's wrong for a bunch of people who are not in that category to talk about this thing, because it's elitist in that sense too. So I do feel it's a very elitist thing to say, unless you're actually within that community to advocate.
The as far as the question of is this realistic or whatever, I mean, again, when it comes down to it, it is a sci-fi, and there's a concept that I think it was The Physics of Superheroes, which is a really fascinating book. I think everyone here would probably enjoy it, but it's I think it was that book where he was talking about what you have to call the miracle exception. It's like there is that suspension of disbelief,
it could
but
work.
it has to.
Yeah.
There in most stories that go into fantastic or science fiction or whatever territory will have at least one thing that is blatantly impossible as far as we know. As long as you are willing to accept that, does everything else work? Yes. And I think in this one, most of it works. The pacing issues would have resolved the parts that didn't work for me, because some of it did seem to go a little too fast, a little too smoothly. That could have been resolved with better pacing. I don't think there was really anything that stood out as that. Just if you can accept that one miracle exception, I don't think there was anything that stood out as it wouldn't work. Yeah.
Well, my favorite Wizard article. What was it? My favorite Wizard. If any of you are familiar with Wizard magazine, one of my favorite letters was talking about. I cannot read Spider-Man because I know that his webbing would stick to his gloves, and they wrote this entire thing about suspension of disbelief because it's like, oh, he's got an aunt that has like 50 heart attacks a day.
No, I get that. I'm fully familiar with the concept of suspension of disbelief. I mean, that's sort of the fun of the segment, is making people talk about whether or not it would scientifically actually work. I'm still a no. Yeah. I think that we've got a couple of no's. Actually, the majority of them, I think, have been like, you can only do that in the movies. What about you, Kroll? What do you think? You think that they can just make you smarter with some brain surgery?
I was watching this, and I don't think they could, but I was thinking it would be nice if they could, because if they could do that, then they could go into your mind and repair damage done by a stroke, which happened to me. So, of course, that's the first thing I thought of is, wow, if they could do this, they could repair my stroke, and I could move my, being back to normal. And unfortunately, I know they don't have that technology now.
Though that is a technology, but that is a technology.
Even if they did, would they share it with us right away?
Oh no! I mean, it would be a long time before someone like me would be. I mean, I don't even know.
Sharing it with you right away is how you get flowers for Algernon. Yes. Do you want to get Charly, bro? Is that
Well,
I could see this also being technology if it worked, if they could figure it out. This is probably similar to, what they're looking for. They're trying to figure out ways to prevent or reverse Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, a lot of stuff. This will probably be a similar idea overall. Yeah.
Oh yeah, I think that the concepts are doable. They just haven't cracked that part yet. Whether it's like whether a developmental disability, whether somebody with an intellectual disability could be made smart, that's a little bit further on. But
it's a little more science fiction. But
as far as like that repair thing, the repairing damage, allowing the brain tissue to regenerate, these things, they have come very close. But very close in science means like decades to
exactly.
I would say maybe with stem cells, like maybe,
but they figured out how to get on the way to that, and I think that's kind of been the consensus so far, is that this is basically, it's possible, just not now.
So,
what about you, Dustin? What do you think?
overall, I would say no
I think
way.
him and Tammy are
but,
the only ones we
again,
have left.
With stem cells, though, I think that's the
Tammy,
only
what do you think?
avenue. So
Yeah.
I think it would be great if they could do something like that. It would help so many people.
You think that this is possible? Or you
Nowadays,
think they could only do this in the movies?
Right now, I think it's probably only in the movies, but you never know. They don't tell us things right away, you know? They could have things out there that they've already tried or but nobody knows about it yet because until they perfect it, they're not going to say anything, you know?
Yep.
Right.
There's a heck of a lot of stuff we said about this type of thing in Star Trek that we would have said the exact same thing in the 60s. And and here we are with a lot of things that they're doing that we would have said probably back then, nah, that's science fiction. It never come to pass.
But the idea is wonderful because if they could, like you guys were already bringing up, it would be helpful for people with Alzheimer's, people who had a stroke, you know, people like on, you know,
concussion damage, maybe.
Well, even with Dave's situation, you know, that
Some
could
brain
help.
damage.
He's not brain damaged.
No, I didn't mean Dave. I just mean other people that have brain damage.
Dane Bramage, just strong words there.
Dave might have some, but that's not what we're talking about here.
Right, but you know,
let me clarify. We're just talking about Dave having brain damage.
It could be helpful
alone.
to his disability. You know what I mean? If this was possible, it would be so helpful to lots of people.
Oh yeah. I don't think that there's too many people that would refuse something like that if it existed and they could get it for like a reasonable, humane price, which this is never going to happen.
If I could get rid of my headaches, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like, so I'd have to, for me to do, if they could do it, and for me to be able to do it, you know, the Medicaid and Mass Health would have to be able to cover it. So, you know, it's not very likely.
Oh, yeah. A lot of things. It's always the impossible can be made possible. And looking at anything, if those people back then, when this movie was made in '68, I believe it was, I can guarantee you they would look at what we've got. And if we said, oh, yeah, this is what the technology is like, many of them would say, no, that's not possible.
Yeah, that's not true. You know, you're right. I mean, just if we took a cell phone alone and went
you
back
guys are
into,
getting
like, the
too deep
60s,
on this, okay?
you know.
The concept is just, can you do that in the movies, like specifically? You know what I mean?
So I know we're running.
The movies or no?
I know we're running on time. So is it possible that we can move to the end or talk about the ending?
Sure.
Well, let's get Dustin to weigh in on this real quick before we just abandon the segment. Come on, boys.
What are we weighing in on?
Because he talked about the stem cell stuff, which
you not been listening.
I do agree with you.
Can you can you do that? What?
Well, you talked over me briefly, but I did weigh in on this. That I thought it was mostly a movie only thing, although like the only way I thought it would be possible would be through stem cell research for regenerating tissue.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But I feel like you'd have to break a lot of ethics rules to actually do this kind of research.
I think as we approach being able to grow certain things in the lab and not need to, we could, in theory, in like 100 years or 1,000 years or some shit, recreate someone's brain in like a jar and then just experiment on that instead of having to actually do it to a person. Yeah,
you could probably do that within 50 years, actually.
And there are countries that
optimistic. We'll agree to disagree at 100. I think that sounds reasonable. Yeah, it could happen. You know,
I think
I'm pretty sure they fucking grew an ear on the back of a mouse. You know, so it's Maybe that was fake,
So,
but I mean, the
Crow,
point is they're 3D printing organs and shit now. So
Yeah, that's
You-
why I said 50, because I think it could be done sooner.
You said something about hating the ending, Crow, in the beginning. Why don't you explain to us why you didn't like the ending?
Well, first you find out that it's temporary. And he goes through all this stuff to try to help fix it, and I guess to no avail. And then in the beginning when he was after the operation and he was dating the teacher. He asked her to marry him, and she says, I don't want to hold you back, and she doesn't. And then near the end, when she realizes that he's going to go back to where he was, and she still loves him, she wants to be together, and she says, marry me. And then he, basically tells her to leave. And, that was just super sad. It's like, you want them at least to be together, even if he wasn't going to be the man he had become. And then, basically the ending, to me, the way they showed it again, him on the swings, was just basically them saying he went back to the way he was. And all this was
you don't know for
basically
sure.
for nothing.
I have issues with the ending, but in a different way. I actually really liked how he said when she's like, "Should I, tell me to go and I'll go." He's like, "Go." I liked that. I thought it was perfect for that because a lot of this, in a way, you could tell that he was less happy when he was smarter, but there was a lot of things that brought him happiness as well. He had a lot of stress, but he was a different person, essentially. He was very different from the Charly there. But then going straight from that scene and then directly to him being like childlike again and playing on the play, in the plays with the kids, I didn't like that. I would have preferred if they would have just dropped it with him, with them separating, and you being left with a kind of what if or maybe.
I can agree with that.
I mean, I agree with the second part of what you said. So
I don't think that a movie
instead of the-
necessarily has to have a happy ending. For it
I
to
think
be a
there's
good
some good
ending.
horror movies that doesn't have to have a happy
It
ending.
doesn't have to be a horror
almost
movie.
a horror ending. Yeah.
But any movie that isn't a horror movie, I want a good ending. This is why I don't watch
That's
them.
weak. It's fucking weak, bro.
That's why I don't watch
You
them.
know?
I don't like it.
It's not the way life works.
I don't.
I,
Exactly. This is why I hate
Hey,
you
you
guys.
Not
see, you like
everyone
escapist
gets-
cinema, and there's nothing wrong
Not
with that. You
everyone
like
gets the
escapist
white
shit.
picket fence with
I
the
watch
with the White
entertainment.
House.
I don't watch shit that's gonna make me sad.
and the White Mouse in the White
It's
House.
not entertaining to be sad.
I
sometimes-
thought that it was kind of, like I say, I just thought it was abrupt to just say,
It was.
especially with him having such a gradual rise. I felt like it should be
Mhm.
more of a gradual decline, not just all right, yep, bye, leave, and then suddenly a moment later, yep, back to the play sets again.
I think it was kind of an anticlimactic ending, and honestly, I had to have Brandon remind me how it ended because I'd forgotten that last little coda. I think that he's right. I agree that had he just ended with that scene with him dismissing her, it would have been a depressing ending, but it would have been much more effective. I do think that ending on this playground gives the film a sense of a nice kind of circularity. Sorry, I just muted myself by mistake. It does give it kind of a circularity. It gives it sort of a sense of coming back to where it was, but it was way too abrupt. And to make that ending stick, they probably would have needed a couple of additional scenes to make it more gradual. And by that point, would it have been a better ending? Maybe. It's hard to say.
No.
Not sure. All I know is I do think that they should have maybe like ended it with a shot of a grave in the backyard of Charlie's residence, showing flowers for Algernon.
Actually, that would have been.
We
I think that
never
would have been a
got
much
those
better.
flowers.
That
We
would have
never
been a
got
better
the
ending.
flowers.
I think that would have been a perfect.
That I can
ending.
agree with. Your guys' little
Yes.
soft-boiled fucking ending. No, but
I think it was pretty grim the way it ended. Anyway, it was kind of like, yeah,
it's what you need sometimes.
I like that idea. It's like going back to the flowers. Change the name to Flowers for Algernon, as it was the
put
book.
the flowers scene in there. Yeah, I'm good.
And then end it like that, and then leave this whole thing, whether he will or he won't, as a mystery. And I think that would actually have been a better ending, because then it would leave the ending up to the audience interpretation.
I almost want Miss Kenyon to be the one bringing the flowers for Algernon.
I could see that.
If it were the case, you know.
Or even cut to a hand that you don't know whose hand it is that's giving it.
That's true.
That would be interesting.
But on that note, let's talk about production and whether we thought the film had good production. Dustin, did you think the film had pretty good production?
Dustin?
Yeah, I thought everything about it was pretty well done. I mean, it looked good. It was shot well. Had some really interesting cinematography in some scenes, like with the split screens and like I don't even know how to describe some of the tricks they
especially during the
motorcycle
development
thing.
That whole scenery, that was like trippy. I mean,
I thought that was a hallucination. I was like, what the hell is going on?
It might have been in some respect, because he literally went off on his own and like experimented with the world, at that moment. There was a time in the novel where he actually just said fuck it all, and since he couldn't be with Miss Kenyon, or actually it was because he'd outgrown her intelligence and stuff, he literally went out and experienced the world, and that was
That's what you gotta do, dude.
That was the montage.
We need a montage. So, yeah, nothing says a genius going off to find themselves like being in a biker gang, right? And then the second scene was sort of like Austin Powers-ish, like he was going to find his mojo.
I love how they depict his room, and I think that set design is a lot of times left to the forefront, but the set design was excellent. How they did the contrast of the rooms, and how they developed it with more and more stuff going into the room, because he didn't need a lot of stuff. He just needed his chalkboard. He had a radio at one time, but he was okay without it because he just had his chalkboard. He was good. And how things got cluttered as it went on. And then they illustrated it when he was showing that fear of returning with all the stuff leaving the room and just going back to what it was.
Yeah, that was an interesting series of moments, because he was haunted by his former self. You know?
Well, they were different people in a lot of ways.
I would say I agree that the overall production was quite solid. Pretty, again, some of the hairstyles and the clothes styles are a little, you know what time period this came out. But other than that, as far as the cinematography, I will admit I thought it was interesting, but those trippier sequences in the split screens too, they were interesting, but they almost seemed out of left field. Like I'm not sure that they were consistent enough in the film to feel like they really were at home, if that makes sense. But they were interesting. I liked them. I just, I wouldn't say that it was. It's hard to say if it was a strength or a debit for this particular movie.
Okay. What about you, Tammy? What did you think about the production?
I thought it was good. I thought, the portrayal of Charly was, very good, and I just I just felt sad for Charlie in a lot of it because of how people treated him and took advantage of him. And
Well,
it's
yeah, we
and
kind
it's
of.
kind of true as to how probably people really would have been to him, and that's what's sad.
I
So
know we kind of overskated some of what his so-called friends did to him. I mean, they basically tricked him to go out and wait for snow on a certain corner, and
Obviously.
that was just cruel.
Oh
yeah, I think the production was good. It was for the time it showed things that could have really gone on at the time and everything. As far as like we said earlier, the experiments and stuff like that probably would not get anywhere today like that, you know, and it would depend on where these were taking place. But that wouldn't today by today's standards that stuff would not be allowed. You know,
Okay. Oh, what about you, Mo? What did you think about the production overall?
Yeah, it's pretty good, dude. I mean, it felt like a really quality, sort of early 70s, late 60s movie. They clearly weren't fucking around. They went in there and they shot some really weird stuff. They shot some really creative stuff. I think everybody looked fine, in terms of costume design or whatever. It's just a really well put together movie all around. The soundtrack was fucking awesome too, as a couple of us have already pointed out. So they just kind of went in there and made a proper adaptation of the novel. They spared no expense.
Okay.
But they also didn't need many because it's not that complicated of a thing to shoot. So
No, definitely not. What about you, Kroll? What did you think about the production?
Well, I'm surprised no one mentioned it, but in the very beginning, when he's on the swing set in the college, the camera angles and everything was really horrible, and it was just like it was very hard to see and out of focus. So in the very beginning, I was really like, I hope this whole movie isn't like this, because I honestly was thinking that I might not watch it in skip tonight because of the beginning, but luckily it changed and got way better.
Well, dude, it's supposed to give you a disoriented, sort of like a gross
Yeah,
feeling.
I
It's
just
not a
hated
thing
it.
that's meant to be.
So,
Yeah, I just hated it. So I'm glad it switched, and
Yeah, that was the intended effect, I think.
then the scenes where he's just like the split screen and stuff like that. I thought that was really weird and kind of out of place, and I was definitely a little confused. Like, is he like dreaming this, hallucinating, or is this really happening? Like in the whole motorcycle scenes. Like, I never read the book, never even heard of the book, so I have no knowledge there. So it just definitely seems weird and kind of out of place for me. But
Yeah.
but what about the sets? Did you like the sets?
Those definitely placed it in the 60s, I thought. Like as just like making tricks.
Now the question is, if you look at this movie as a movie that's meant to be in the 60s, does that change your mind? Oh, well, this takes place in the 60s.
Yeah, it does. I mean, when I first started watching it, I was thinking it was like 70. It felt like it was 70. And then when I looked up the date, it said 68. So I'm like, I was pretty close to it. 68, 70, pretty close.
And I do think that this movie couldn't really have occurred. I don't think you could have set this movie in. Well, you could have, but it would have had to do a lot of freaking bat flips to be set today. So
Right.
I do think that the 60s is perfect.
Where I watched it, the streaming site I watched it on, it said it was a 2020 movie, and I'm like, okay. And so I watched it, and I'm like, wait, this is definitely not a 2020 movie. And then I saw Dick Van Patten, and I'm like, okay, unless he has a fucking twin, that's Dick Van Patten.
Actually, most of the main cast has passed on at this point, so
they were resurrected for this film.
Yes.
Well, I didn't really recognize anybody else except for Dick Van Patten. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's the only one I recognized.
Alrighty.
Right,
heading over to Brandon here. What did you think about production?
Well, as I said, I thought that the set design was amazing in this. I agree with Kroll sometimes that the stuff was I agree with Kroll and Mo. I do agree that the original cinematography was disorienting and that could be disconcerting, but I also agree that that was how they meant to go with it, and therefore give a extra boon to the cinematography.
Okay. And I thought that the production was pretty good overall. I guess I have more of a love for the novel and a like for this film, so I guess I really didn't see the transitional camera shots that were talked about. As far as the school and stuff like that, I don't know. I think this is a product of its time, and I'm honestly think that this was a better time for this film to come out, especially since there were a lot of controversial subjectry in this in the novel as well as the film, and I think this film holds up to this day. I think there are ideas in here that can be very detrimental, especially even now. So I was impressed with the production value of this film, and the different weird camera shots I rather like from this film. So I know we talked about music a little bit before we got to talk about music. What did people think about the music?
Well, I think that it's really awesome that we get a score from Ravi Shankar and his very world famous sitar player, if I recall correctly. And it had kind of a 70s, 60s, 70s vibe to it that I don't know. I thought it helped set the mood for the movie.
Okay.
I thought it did well. Did very well.
Yeah, Ravi Shankar. What else is he known for? Okay, he's known for the movie Gandhi and Natural Born Killers, and I guess he did some of the stuff behind the Darjeeling.
Ooh, okay. I had not associated him much with movies overall, but that's kind of fun. That makes sense. And of course, he is notably as well the father of Anushka Shankar and Nora Jones. So very fun connection there.
Seems like he's done a lot of music for a lot of documentary type stuff too.
Didn't you mention how much you like the music behind it, Mo?
He's not here anymore.
He
somewhat dropped out.
He left us.
Well, I know Mo did mention at least at one point that he did like the music. So just as
yeah, he did.
But Yeah, I
But
guess
he's
he
not a
was.
fan of the Beatles. Go figure.
But moving on, let's talk about favorite scenes.
I actually
Well, we
didn't.
all didn't.
Oh wait, Dustin actually
Oh.
has something to say.
Oh,
I
yeah.
sure.
didn't. I did too.
Yeah,
Sure.
as we just blow the fuck by. I actually didn't notice the music all that much, but I think that goes back to what we've said before on the show, that if the music blends into the story, you don't notice it's there. So I think this is one of those cases where the music complements the action so much that you don't really notice it's there. So I think the music for this was pretty good in that regard.
Okay. What about you, Crow?
Hey, well, I agree. For the most part, it blended in and was decent background. There was a lot of great music during that time. They could have played during it. Actually songs, but they didn't. But the part where, like I said, I know if he was hallucinating, the split screen part, that music there was really odd, and I guess it fit the odd what we were watching. It was already odd, but I don't know. I just I didn't particularly care for the music there or that scene in particular. So just wanted to point that out.
Well,
the rest of
that's
the music seemed to go fine. Worked well with the movie.
Well, that would be a good thing, wouldn't it? Because then you would be just as upset as he was when he's going through the scene, because that's the idea, right? That he's upset and there. So if it's also
Well,
working its magic on you, then there
he's upset and
there.
times are changing. That's what's going on there. I think he's kind of going on a personal journey about like what he's experiencing in the world.
Effective.
Yep.
Yeah.
So I think the music accentuates the film. I think that this comes from a turbulent time of psychedelatry, so I get why the music is kind of psychedelic. So,
There's a lot of great psychedelic music out there, though. What they chose was just weird. In my opinion,
it was, but it was also a fairly weird situation.
it was. It really was. I mean, I guess the music did go with the situation of the screen, but I just didn't really care for either.
Understandable. So let's go into favorite scenes. Let's start with you, Jake. Is there a favorite scene or scenes that you could take from this film going forward?
I'm not sure anything really leaps off the page as a favorite, but I'm probably going to go with something that the scene that I have the screen capture for just amused me. So I'm going to mention that. But I think, honestly, I'm probably going to agree with what Brandon said earlier about that big scene at the end where he's basically taking everyone to task for the way that they are not really, I guess, for their detachment, the way that it is all just an experiment to them, the way that he does stand up and take them all to the principal's office, if you will. I thought that was kind of cool. Yeah.
Okay. Going over to Tammy. Is there a scene or scenes from this movie that you would take from it going forward here?
I guess one of my favorite scenes would be when he beats the mouse and he gets, he was all happy playing with him and he goes, okay, we're gonna, and he goes against the mouse and he beats the mouse and he was just all ecstatic because he beat the mouse. So I thought that was one of my favorite ones because he was so upset every time the mouse beat him.
Well, he was so disappointed that he thought he was dumber than a mouse.
Correct.
Um,
when he beat the mouse,
Heading over to Dustin, if there was a scene or scenes from this movie that you could take remembering going forward, what would they be?
Well, the main things I'm going to remember from this movie are the ending, first of all, and I'm also going to remember kind of the speech that he gives at the presentation, which, I see things as they really are, and it was a little cliched, I think, but overall it was fine, and there were some good jokes in there, and I think the most memorable thing for me will be that bizarre motorcycle montage. And then where he's like dating the teacher for like a few weeks, like in the woods, like they're like camping and stuff. Like I thought he was imagining all that. And then it's like, no, really happened. And it's like, really? So that's going to stick out in my mind for a while. All three of those.
Okay. Heading over to you, Carl. If there was a scene or scenes that you could take from
I also like the romantic scene between him and the teacher, and them on the carousel, and him asking her to marry him, and then her saying, I don't want to hold you back and stuff. I thought that stood out, and I really enjoyed it. It was enjoyable, fun. Not necessarily a favorite scene, but I do want to mention the scene where they have the dough in the locker and he's sitting there playing it, and I don't know, it was just, I laughed. That was kind of funny. Obviously it came from a mean place, but just the way he portrayed it and the way he like rolled with it, like he didn't get upset, he just rolled with it. I thought that was, maybe it was because he didn't realize they were being mean, but I just thought it was kind of cool that he didn't get upset about it, that he just rolled with it and he had fun with it. So I just wanted to mention that scene too.
Okay.
Actually, one more I wanted to mention related to that. I didn't want to say it's necessarily a favorite scene because of the meanness and bullying surrounding it.
Right.
But the one where they get him to do, where Gimpy shows him what he does.
The machine. Yeah.
And then he goes and does it perfectly. And just that one moment where you see Gimpy just like, holy crap, he did it better than me. Just seeing that asshole put in his place was a great moment.
Yeah, it really was. It really was a nice moment. And then of course, a moment later you find out that he gets fired because
and so like I said, it was really surrounded by not good stuff, but
and actually in the novel, he actually quits before he gets fired, but in the movie he gets fired.
So. I think it worked better in the movie. I mean, I haven't read the book, so I can't say for sure, but I don't know. I think it just made it seem more the way it would go, because they were all assholes. They all acted like they were his friends, and they obviously weren't. And they were all assholes, and it really seemed like the way that guy looked, like he was pissed, and it really seemed like he would do something to get him fired because he showed him up. Basically, because they had said, it took him 2 weeks to learn how to do the machine, and here he just learned it in the 5 minutes that they took to show him how to do it.
And in the novel, when he loses his intelligence, he just goes back and like works the same job that he had, whereas here he didn't. So.
Well, we didn't get that far. We only got to the part where in the movie it just ends with him losing his intelligence. So
Yep.
Yeah, you don't
Yep.
know what happened, where he went to. You assumed he got a job and stuff, but yeah.
I'm just saying in relation to what happens in the novel. I just know a lot about Brandon. If there was a scene or scenes that you could take from this movie going forward, what would they be?
Well, most of them have been mentioned. I mean, my favorite scene is the one that most have mentioned, which is the one where he does his speech in front of all the scientists and them asking the questions and him basically taking everyone to task. And then, of course, as was also mentioned, the one with him bringing it back to the bullies. So I want to try and bring one that hasn't been mentioned, so I had to think about it. And I guess the one scene that hasn't been mentioned is him looking at his room and him panicking about being not so smart again, and looking at all the things in his room, and then watching them all disappear to go
And
back
being chased
to
by
that,
himself.
Yeah, and I thought that might be a though
It was
nowhere
definitely a
near
memorable moment.
yeah
And
nowhere near the others that were mentioned, but definitely a good scene.
yeah.
I think I have many favorites from this movie, and many of them have been mentioned. And I have to second you, Brandon, on that haunting scene. Scene where, I mean, who would think that if they got more intelligent, that they would be haunted by their former consciousness? You know, their former selves. I mean, this man, he did not want to become that earlier person. He really didn't, and I got that from the novel. He wanted to save himself from becoming that unintelligent being. At least as far as he was concerned in his mind, and that's why he was in a race against himself. And it's that race against himself and his excitement at first, becoming intelligent, the one that Tammy mentioned. I mean, that he was really excited. He ran downstairs, crossed the street into the school, and literally was so excited that he'd finished. But it was that innocence of what happens next. What I'm ready for it. What happens next?
Or the scene with the landlord where she's talking about
I was
how
just
to
going to
keep a
say
good
that.
pet.
Yeah, that's the one I was
pretty
talking
nice of
about.
her
Yeah.
to tell her that having the pet is a good thing, and he needs to take care of it, and it's like that was a touching scene.
And she gave him a bone from her dog.
Yeah, which is kind of weird to give a mouse, but yeah.
Oh, what was that line she had? I don't know if a mouse is
Carnivorous
or a vegiferous.
veginous, I think she said.
What was that word she said?
I think she said veginous.
Vegetus or veget. Yeah. It was interesting, whatever it was.
Yeah, it really it was.
I like the landlady. I thought that she was because I really do think that she had that motherly aspect that she just wanted to do what she could. That was
well, and at first I thought that landlady actually was like had a husband or something like that.
Yeah.
She was talking to someone while he brought Miss Kenyon upstairs.
What was it?
And she was like, I hope you're not bringing. I hope I hope that girl's out of here by 10.
Right. No hanky panky under my roof.
Yeah. I don't know if mice are carnivorous or vegetarious.
Vegetarians. I like that. I love that word. That's a great word.
Yeah.
But in any case, is there anything else that anyone wants to mention before we before we
I
sign off
did
here.
want to mention one thing about the area. As you guys know, I live in Massachusetts, so I've been to Boston a million times. I used to drive.
Oh yeah.
So I drove there. I did recognize a little bit of Boston, but a majority of that is like so clean and looks so nice that it doesn't look like Boston.
Well, I've also been to Boston, and I know that most of it is a college town. And one of
definitely. I mean, I've been to the college town area, so that definitely seems correct.
I've been to the Bunker Hill Monument because a Bunker Hill Day happened on my birthday, on June 17th. I know that for a fact. Wait until you see the whites of your eyes and then fire.
I don't think I've ever been there myself, but I've been to Boston.
Dave,
Boston
I didn't
Museum
realize
of
you were that
Science
old.
and some of the other places. But yeah, I mean, and
I'm
where
not
Faneuil
that
Hall
old.
is, I've
It's
definitely.
just I know Bunker Hill Day.
So it definitely looks a lot cleaner than now, and a little bit of it was recognizable, but the majority of it wasn't, because it was just like, wow. It used to be clean.
The only thing they didn't, show while they were in Boston was the Cheers bar, but that's okay.
They didn't show a lot of things. They didn't show. They didn't show the Green Monster with the Fenway Park. They didn't show the Boston Museum of Science. Yeah, there's a lot they didn't show.
That would have been a longer movie.
Oh, I know. I'm just saying, there's a lot they didn't show.
Yeah,
definitely wouldn't have been showing the Cheers bar in '68.
No, definitely not, because that was a '70s show. But in any case,
well, it might actually. Well, that was a real bar, so it might have been around.
it probably was, but
I don't know. I'd have to look it up.
Show didn't start till '83, so that wouldn't have been a thing.
It could have been something that they showed, like accident, like just happened to show.
Yeah.
And then later on, you're like, hey, that's what she is.
Hey.
Yeah. It wouldn't be because of the show.
But,
all right.
Alrighty. In that case, I think this is where we do our outros. So, I'm going to start with you, Krull, and work my way forwards here. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Well, I'm disabled, so I don't work. So I just basically stay home. I watch movies and TV shows and play a bunch of games, video games. I read some. I enjoy reading Star Wars, and I come on these podcasts, and I love talking about all the movies I watch and TV shows and stuff. So it's really great to be able to come on and at least talk about one movie I watch in depth, and actually another movie on Sunday, because I do another podcast with Dave and Tammy there as well. So it's fun. I enjoy it. I haven't missed many. I missed last not last week, the week before last, unfortunately. But yeah, it's really fun. I really enjoy it, even if the movie isn't my favorite. It's still so nice to sit there and talk about a movie and get people's opinions on it and work through it.
Alrighty, heading over to you, Dustin. Now, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do? You're on mute there, buddy.
Oh, I'm a horror collector living here in Milwaukee. I have a YouTube channel for showing off the things I find, the Crypt of Horrors. That's also the name of my Instagram. I'm working on coming back to both platforms since I took a really long break, because it's just been a wild couple dozen months or so. I got a leg injury in November, and it put me down for a while. So, but I'm largely healed from it, and I can start doing stuff again pretty soon. So, that's pretty much all there is that I do. You can follow me on Twitter at DurCryptaxis. And we'll hang out there. It'll be fun.
Alrighty. Heading over to you, Tammy. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Yes, I'm David's fiance, and I enjoy going on this group and the other one, talking about movies with everybody, and learning their insights and what they think and everything. And I do my own collecting of some movies and music. And then in the summer, I play around with my 1972 Grand Prix.
Oh, getting closer.
Mm-hmm.
I expect pictures.
Alrighty, heading over to you, Jake. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
All right, my name's Jake. I am the co-host of SeptumSin versus the World, where we talk about all kinds of physical media and such like. And I am a movie and anime and general media collector who also is trying to balance that with a very, 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 very busy schedule as a is a co-founder of a company and also trying to work a full-time job on top of that. But I still make time to come out for a couple of these discussions each week and try to get a few more things in the meantime. I'm having a lot of fun right now with my prep for our end-of-month anime discussion, which will be Konosuba, God's Blessing on This Wonderful World. And it is a fun show so far. So, it's good
Less than 2 weeks.
Yeah, less than 2 weeks. And, I'm just enjoying the fact that it is spring.
I am not enjoying that fact. My headache and everything else tells me I'm not enjoying that.
Well, Brandon, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Well, as Jack said, SeptumSin versus the World. We love physical media, the collection, and all sorts of things related. Couple things. We have I had a review for the Craiglon incident, part 1. So I thought it was a pretty good in-depth. It's the second time I've done these in-depth analyses of film. Usually films that people normally would not give this sort of treatment to, like the Craiglon incident plus part 1. I'm working on my part 2 review, which is going to be great. And I am also working towards, as we next week, we're going to be talking about the Versus Awards, and we're going to have a meeting. So for those of you who are not who don't know, we've got that listed below. Matter of fact, if you want to join us in deciding what should be nominated and voted on this year, and about categories. Next Monday, we're going to be doing a meeting about it. It's going to be a lot of fun. We're going to we'll have punch and pie, but nobody else can have it. And but we're going to enjoy it when we talk about how much we are looking forward to the awards.
Alrighty. And my name is David Streggy. I'm one of the founding fathers of Inside Movies Galore. So thank you for coming along with us on this fairly entertaining film journey, where I've been showing you a little bit of films that I know that I enjoy. I know sometimes they're questionable for others, but we have come across our 5th year of being on the air. So it's been fun showing you films so far. But next week, I have another film to show you guys, which is directed by Ben Wheatley, called High Rise. It was filmed in 2015. Looking forward to discussing some something more that's frightening and a little bit terrifying, but it's definitely trippy, and I figured it's up our alley of watching. So come back and listen to us as we discuss that film. But I also moonlight under a different channel called Delusions of Grandeur, where we also podcast under the same name. But I also do some pickup videos and some video reviews of my own from time to time. So like, share, and subscribe. And hopefully we'll see you next time here on Inside Movies Galore. Say goodnight, everyone.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.